everyone. I hope you are enjoying the day that the Bloom Alliance has been able to put together here at the California Association of Black School Educators Summer Institute. This has been an amazing experience for us, and I'm excited to actually have a conversation with a good friend of mine, Dr. D'Artagnan Scorza. The theme for this year is the systemic de-education of Black boys, and the Bloom Alliance being a part of this second annual event is to bring a different framing as to how to counteract that work. And the idea of trying to frame some of this for them. What is the difference between deficit and anti-deficit approaches?
We're all here today, right, because we really very much believe in and want to do what's best, especially for Black students. And all of our students, but we know that so many of our Black students have faced challenges over the years historically, not only in the sort of outputs that we experience in our schools, but also, what goes into structuring and or forming educational opportunity for our young folks. So let me just start by saying that a deficit approach blames people for their circumstances. So it assumes that it's either because of your lack of will or your lack of knowledge or skills. Maybe you know better and you just don't want to do better, right? That you are in the circumstances you are. What deficit thinking does not account for all of the things that need to go well for you to achieve these milestones throughout your life. We call them life course outcomes, right? Being able to enter school with secure attachment and be able to enter school ready to learn and being proficient by grades 4 and grades 8, or being able to have stable food at home or in school when you go to school. We see the role that inflation's playing today in making it difficult for people to get to and from work. Or, our wages are rising, but now we're losing those gains, right? Like at the same time, our rents are rising. So families are struggling to make ends meet and keep a roof over their head. And so deficit thinking ignores all of that. And it locates the problem in the individual. Anti-deficit thinking recognizes that an individual's choices are predicated upon their circumstances. And I say this all the time. If you want to eat healthy food, if you want to do well, you want to succeed, you can't do well and eat healthy food if you don't live in a place that offers healthy food. You can't make those choices. Or if you want to go to college and you don't have sufficient high school counselors and college counselors or teachers that are trained enough to help you be prepared, right? You're gonna have a much harder time going to college. So an anti-deficit approach recognizes that it's the ecological and contextual factors that shape your life course. They shape your outcomes. That if you lack good teachers, you lack high school counselors, you lack good food, right? You have a hard time, you're suffering in your health, or we haven't structured things enough to help young folk build socio-emotional skills, then the choices that you make, the circumstances that you live in are gonna shape the outcomes you experience.
Right.
And so let me just tell you what it looks like. What someone who's anti-deficit looks like is someone who recognizes when that child has put their head down on the table in the classroom that something else is going on. Mm-hmm. Instead of yelling at them and saying, sit up or I'm gonna send you to detention or I'm gonna call the principal or get the dean in here, right? They recognize that, hey, if that child is putting their head down, maybe there's something I can do to help further engage them or deter or figure out what's going on. And I'm gonna just get real here for a second.
Let's do it.
Because sometimes teachers and educators, and this is not to blame them because I love them to death. My wife is a teacher, I've taught, right? Like sometimes we're like, that's not my job to, help that child, right? They need to come to school. That's their parents' jobs and that's their this and that's their that. And I get it. I know our educators are dealing with so much. Look, I just read an article this morning that showed that, we lost 4,000 teachers in California Teachers Association this year, right? Like, look, they're leaving the profession. There's a lot that teachers have been asked to do. I get it. I'm a faculty member. Being able to teach in hybrid, it's hard. None of this is easy, right? But put that aside for a second. You got a person, a human being sitting right here in front of you who is struggling, right? To ignore that struggling human being demonstrates a lack of care. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And most of what I've been able to be and do successfully in the classroom has come from a place of care. Even when I'm hard on my students, even when I get on them, because I show them I love them, because I show them I care for them, they will listen. They will put their heads up. I will take them to the side and be like, yo, tell me what's going on. Well, and you don't even have to tell me right now. Do you need some time?
Right.
Are you hungry? What can I do? And I kid you not, almost every single time there is a story behind that child who's putting their head down. There's a reason why they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So an anti-deficit person will walk over and be like, what can I do to support you? How can I show up for you? How can I be there for what supports can I get for you?
Mm-hmm.
Who do I need to call? Let me go call the wraparound service specialist. Let me go get our school counselor if we have one. Let me go get the nurse. Are you hungry? What do I need to do to help make sure that you can show up and be your best self, right? Do you need the time to go sleep? You know, some of our young folk are taking care of their siblings. Some of them are working jobs with their parents, right? Just to try and help make ends meet. Some of them, are dealing with family members that have had COVID or they lost people. And I know us as adults, we're dealing with all these things too. So if we know we're dealing with it, imagine what our young folk are dealing with.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
That's true.
So at the end of the day, someone who's anti-deficit is going to stop blaming people for their circumstances and recognize that the ecological and contextual factors, the things that happen in our lives, the things that happen around us in our neighborhoods, our schools, our families, shape our lives. And if we want to ensure that people are thriving, we'll take those things into consideration and we'll provide the resources that are needed so that people can get to the next level.
Man, you touched on so many different parts that are so spot on, right? And I just want to come back around to it to go just a little bit deeper, I guess more narrow, to narrow some of it. The most impacted community in the school environment, which in most cases in cities across America are Black students, right? Especially in the public school system. In order to make sure that all students are thriving, from an equity standpoint, we have to actually start if we're trying to make the playing field level, we have to start where the whole starts, right? And so how do we make sure that we are creating thriving environments in this 21st century thinking around how to transform school environments toward that end, right? Like what is needed beyond just the individuals changing the way they are teaching and the way they're showing up for students? What about the environment itself? Like what shifts need to happen in those spaces?
I had a faculty member years ago who said to me, let's examine how schools are structured. We talked about them as institutions and as systems and the outcomes they produce and the harm in some cases that they create. And one of the arguments that was made that we had to examine was, are schools designed to do exactly what they're doing, right? Are they structured to create the outcomes that they are?
Right.
Schools and education, especially in private schools, were created to create leaders for our society, right? They were intended for a very small group of elite individuals who were believed to be the inheritors of democracy and society. They weren't necessarily, that's right. They weren't necessarily designed for everyone, right? And then when they became designed for everyone, they were designed based upon a manufacturing economy, right? We needed workers, we needed people in factories, we needed people as laborers. They weren't necessarily designed to try and create sort of our next generation of leaders. But over the years, you've seen attempts to try and transform schools into being in many ways these equalizers, right? These as Horace Mann put out these institutions that'll make it possible for all people to do well. And I think in many ways, we've been working to live up to those ideas, right? Mm-hmm. But the problem is we have not fundamentally altered the structure itself. The structures are still based upon an industrial economy. They're still based upon a system of thinking that is not grounded in the lived experience and the needs of people today. Black students, right? There's something in this society called the Black Economic Utility Standard. You look at programs like Aid for Dependent Children and Families, right? AFDC, and prior to that, ADC. Black families were excluded from those programs. You look at the call them welfare reform programs in the early 90s, right? A lot of these programs were based upon wanting to keep, Black mothers working during certain periods and keep, men from not having to ever receive these types of benefits, right? And while some of these restrictions were outlawed, we haven't fundamentally altered the role that these policies play. The truth is, if we're going to really get this right for Black students, we got to take a step back and fundamentally rethink the ways in which our structures themselves are are designed and the ways in which our institutions carry out their efforts. Even though private schools serve as like these places of inequality, if you go to an actual private school, you'll see they teach very different from what we teach in public schools.
Style of teaching is totally different.
And you have to ask yourself, why is that? Now, I'm not saying that we need to base what we're doing on private schools. I'm just saying that we need to really ask ourselves, well, if all these wealthy people are teaching in this way, right? These affluent communities are teaching their kids in this way. Why are they doing that? And what are these institutions designed to do that consistently perpetuates their ability to maintain their affluence and their wealth?
That part.
Right? It's not that we need to go up and create a whole bunch of private schools for our kids. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, I think we need to invest in public education because it is the number one place where Black students can thrive and do well because we have resources that are made available. But if affluence reproduces affluence and people who are in positions of affluence are reproducing that affluence through these educational institutions, we need to ask ourselves, why? Why are they benefiting and our children are not? What are they doing? Again, not for us to replicate, but what are they doing that we need to understand so that we can alter the dynamics in our own institutions?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that there's a bit of doing that analysis and being okay with shifting the outcomes, because the outcome we have changed strategies but have not shifted the outcomes at all, right? So you still have outcomes that are tied and connected to theories and needs of yesteryear that are not directly tied to where we are and where we're going moving forward, particularly for a new generation that thinks about the world in a totally different way than we did when we were coming up, right? And so my last question on this, I'll go to a specific change that you helped usher in with some of your peer orgs with, like, changing the model for LAUSD into more of a care first model, with even removing police off campuses and adding more elements for restorative justice on campuses. Like, can you talk a bit about the thinking behind those things and those elements and how that plays a role into the future of the school district?
Yeah, when we were doing the work we were doing in LAUSD to decriminalize campuses and some of the actions that students engaged in, it started by listening to the students, right? Like,
it's going back to the fundamentals of what we've been talking about the whole time.
Man, I'm telling you, they were the ones out there talking about these police are harming us on our campuses. They were the ones saying we want more opportunity. They were the ones saying we want ethnic studies and education that teaches us about our own history. It was listening to the students, and all we did was get behind them. They were the ones who said, here in Inglewood schools when we ran the bond campaign, I want to be able to drink clean water out of a fountain.
That part.
Right? Like, I want to be able to look outside my window. I don't want it to be a black window. Like, why is my window black and I can't see through the window? It was just listening to the students. They had a voice, and what we wanted to do was privilege that voice. Their leadership, I think, in many ways is what guided all of the work that we did in LAUSD, because they said how they felt when police officers were on campus. They felt like they were being criminalized. The sounds of their bells reminded some students of the sounds of prisons, right? The gates around their campus, right? The metal detectors. They're the ones who lifted these things up. And then when they would go to other schools in Santa Monica or Beverly Hills or Palos Verdes, and they would see open campuses and lush green yards and beautiful buildings with equipped science labs, they were like, wait a minute. But when you are a young person and you see the conditions of another person and they're thriving and they're doing well and they're going to college and you're over here in your own community, you're like, but I want to go to college and I want to thrive and I want to do well, but I don't have these resources. I don't have enough books. I don't, that does something, right, to an individual where they understand that, like, maybe it's not all me, right? Maybe it's not me at all, right? Maybe there's something about these conditions in this environment that I'm in that needs to change.
Yeah.
So the work in LAUSD that we did, both pushing for investments in Black students. I mean, we went through all of the ed code and penal and civil code, and examined which ones would be eligible for diversion. We did a lot of work, right? Doing that, I think, helped us push the institution in the direction that our young folk wanted to see it go.
I love that. I love that answer because it goes back to the themes of what we've been talking about this entire time of elevating the voice of those who are most impacted, making sure that we're taking an analysis of everything that's on the table and then shifting the outcomes based on what we've learned and where we're headed. Even making sure that those who are impacted are involved in the creation of the new direction. Like all of that is important if we're moving in a world where all people have the ability to live whole and free, liberated lives.